Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. We are back. My name is John Henry Soto. As always, I'm here with Mr. George Batista, and we are so excited about today. In this episode, we're going to be deep diving into the heartbeat of every great band, the drummers, damn it. We've had the honor of interviewing some great true legends behind the kid here, whose stories, techniques, and passion have shaped music history. And we are so excited today because not just that, but we're going to be looking at the history of drumming from ancient rhythms to modern innovations that celebrate how this powerful art form continues to evolve. And good evening, everyone. We are very excited to have you here with us. I tell you, we've talked about doing something like this for a long time. George, as some of you may know, George is a great, amazing, fantastic drummer. He was there. I was there when George started, which I think of it amazing. And sometimes even when we were on stage playing, I remember thinking, man, we're doing it. We're
Yeah.
playing. And there we were setting up George's drum set for the first time and figuring out, oh, I think these are called toms. Oh, this is big one is called the floor tom. Oh, these things are called hi-hats, I believe. And we put them all together as kids, and we got to play and we got to do a lot of things and record, and just a wonderful thing. Not just that, but I'm a guitar player. That's what I play. It's the only thing I really know how to play. But I love the drums. It's my second favorite instrument. If someone said, "Okay, you can't be a guitar player anymore. What do you want to be?" I would be a drummer. I would be a drummer because I just love it. The third thing would be a ukulele. No, the third thing would be actually I had the ukulele is actually a great instrument.
It is a great instrument.
Um, the kazoo is my third because there's a lot of humming.
And you
But
get a lot of
seriously,
chicks with
a
the
lot of
kazoo.
chicks with yeah, nice. Um, but yeah, I love the drums, and so we're gonna deep dive into drums. George is obviously gonna lead the charge on this one. I will come in and step in and give my 2 cents in as we move along here. But once again, thank you very much for joining us. As always, you can find our shows at johnhenrysotoshow.com. And you can find George Batista's wonderful show, Wellness Talk, as well. You can find that at georgebatista.com. And we are here live every Sunday night. You can also catch my show Monday through Fridays at 9 a.m. Central. And there we talk about film, everything about film, some controversial stuff about film. I get deep into stuff. I go a little bit beep sometimes on it because of some of the things happening in the industry. But it's a lot of fun, and we're having fun there. So those are a little plug for what's happening right now. And George, take it away.
Thank you, sir. So today it's all about drums and drummers. Again, so let's dive into it first of all. And when we look back at drums, and by the way, we can do like 5 shows on this because there's
Yeah,
just so much
this is way too much
information.
to cover. Yeah, I know.
There's so much information. I mean, there's so many drummers. There's so many things to talk about. So we'll try to make. I try to make some of these things brief as I can. But if we look at the drum history, okay, when we go back, right, nobody really knows exactly as far as when the whole, the drums started in terms of like, how they were used, that type of thing. Nobody knows the exact timeline, but they surmise and they look at historical records and what they found and stuff like that. But the earliest records of man-made drums actually date back to China, which is very interesting. And they've carbon dated these drums back to anywhere from 5,500 to 2350 BC.
Damn.
Yeah. And these drums were made of alligator hides and wood and clay. And they were, typically used for rituals, different types of rituals and stuff like that. Drums has always been a thing for communication.
Communication, yeah.
Always, always, since the beginning, whether it was rituals, whether it was signals, all that. That's always been the number one thing that drums were used for back then.
Yeah, and you also think of just the idea of hitting a thing,
Right.
and then hitting it in a way that other people would understand. I mean, isn't that what Morse code technically is?
Yes, yes, that's
They're
right.
just hits, right? I
It's
mean,
yep. And then
yeah,
you develop it into a pattern because that's really what Morse
patterns,
code was it was just
right?
pattern.
It's patterns, yeah. And we have
So
patterns in drums. Amazing. It's
yeah,
all,
it's incredible what the human mind
yeah,
can
just like
do.
they just figured it out, you know.
Yeah. So that's kind of
And
where
now AI is destroying it all.
thank you, Doctor Evil. But so then so that's the other. So so we take drums all the way, kind of moving forward in time. Then we go into more like later times. We go into like the medieval time and the Renaissance time, where we have drums now being used in war.
Can I show some of these when you let me know? 'Cause I know I have
Absolutely,
some.
absolutely. Yeah, it show many of the
You tell me.
clips.
Well, this is the
Go
oldest.
so what you're looking at here, and those of you, by the way, who are listening, is just a picture of some of the oldest drums they have found and the skins and how they
These
were
are
put
amazing. I mean,
together.
they look kind of
And they look
good.
amazing. They look
They
great. It
look
look
like in
like
good shape.
yeah, absolutely. So there's three drums there, but these are some of the oldest drums that were found in civilization. Again, with alligator skins and wood and that type of thing. So that's kind of what they look like and how they put them together.
That is wild.
Yeah, it's incredible. Then if we kind of fast forward a little bit more to again the Renaissance and the medieval times and stuff like that, then we see these wooden drums now, where this is where you have sticks coming in
Right.
and sticks coming in to hit to hit the drums and stuff like that. And this is where drums were used more for like signals in battles and wars. He's talking about making sure that the march of the battalion remains in time, sending coded messages throughout the battlefields. So drums have played huge roles in this. So those are the types of drums that were used through those times. Then
Wow.
we kind of go forward into when we get into like the 1800s now, right? Drums continue to be communication. They continue to be used by the military to send messages and signals during wartime. And as a matter of fact, in the Civil War, drummer boys learned dozens of different drum calls so they can send messages to the troops on the battlefield.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And
I knew there was a drummer boys just from Bing
yep,
Crosby.
and we and we see here a picture of some of these young drummers, just working on patterns and different things. And this is where you start to get kind of like that idea of the drum corps and stuff like that. And really, really, this is where the drum pattern started to really, really develop, huge in that. So
And so this is so we're looking, okay, so the drums, we obviously, it's a form of communication. Of course, what happens when something gets, they realize they can communicate something, they're going to communicate war patterns or ideas or something that has to do with trying to win over something, or
right,
and so then it kind of just goes into that routine. But it's interesting that the patterns, the patterns were always significant in the communication part, because it's still in music, still
yes,
such an important part of music, so it's,
absolutely,
and I can't even imagine, I mean, can you imagine what a amazing sounds, what it must have sounded like, with these, just what
yeah.
they were doing at that time, because I mean, there must have been a virtuoso person,
Oh, definitely,
right? There must
definitely,
have been,
yes.
maybe we haven't heard, we only know what we know, but man, it's just incredible to think about it.
Yeah, and
A
if
lot of
you
violence in drums, George. I don't know if it's John, I said myself. Yeah, so there's a lot of violence. Really, it's
It is interesting, but you remember I mean, we've all seen those pictures and those even in movies, right? Where we see these guys marching and it's like dun, 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 and they're just
yeah,
marching in perfect form and
yeah.
that type of thing, and then they're going into the battlefield and stuff like that.
I mean,
Just
isn't that
crazy.
how the redcoats, right? They would just
Yes,
they would just be perfect, and that was their technique of just kind of going and just giving, even though they lost, but they just didn't have a good paradiddles. I think.
exactly.
I think it was just like Sorry, let me start again. One, two, three. I was just getting shot left and right. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just
the
crazy.
poor drummers always, they always
The
have a hard
drummer,
time.
even back then, the
Even back
drummer
then,
got
we're getting,
getting screwed,
it's that right. It's that old joke about four musicians and a drummer, right?
right?
So you have now the military men and then the drummer in the back.
Right.
It's poor
I
guys. I
know.
tell you.
It must have been such an. I mean, these kids were boys too. I mean, these were boys
Yeah, yeah,
that were hired out. So some of them must have died as well because they were in the gunfire. For Christ, I mean, they were. I know they were on the side, but it seemed like war somehow had some more structure to it, right? Like
hmm
as it got more advanced, it just got messier and messier, and then it just became more. But it seemed like they had some idea of like marching, synchronized fighting
right.
was a rational way of doing it, and that's what they did. And then it wasn't until probably Motley Crue. No, it wasn't until much later that they stopped using because I don't believe that they use it today. Obviously,
Right, right, right. Yeah, and we see the change. The change happens. Post Civil War, post all that type of stuff, and then late 1800s, it starts to change where drums going into the 1900s now.
Mm.
We start to see drums being used more for leisure, being used more for music, like more. It's more concentrated in musical purposes now.
Right, and that
Okay.
happened. Now, this is interesting because I talk a lot about vaudeville and stuff like
hmm
that, and that must have because vaudeville was there were vaudeville theaters spread across the country, but even before the theaters themselves, there were just troops
Yes.
that would just get together, and they would have an act.
Right.
The act would stroll into town. They would go around doing little performances and saying that the big show was either tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon, whatever. And they would go around doing it, get everybody in town to come over. They'd pay their few little pennies, whatever it was, and they would get this entertainment. A lot of them were musical
Yes.
acts.
That's right.
Now, there was no, I mean, yes, we had guitars, there were different instruments like that, but there was no amplification during that
hmm
time. So the drums, I'm sure, had to be an important part of the shows as well.
Right.
You know, you have the big drum, right? The boom, boom, because people will come out with these things. And there's old vaudevillian footage, well, not footage necessarily, but photos of that time where you see the instruments in the background and stuff. And maybe when we do another show like this, we can pull out some of that era, because this is great going back to like the first time that we found drums till till today. That's what we're gonna do today. But then it'd be also good to go back and do a show on just a particular era, I
Yes.
should say.
Yes. Absolutely.
Maybe a 30-year period of where the development happened.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, that definitely be great.
Yeah.
And thinking about vaudeville, especially back then, 1800s, 1900s, where you get the turn of the century, there was not a lot of budget for like bigger orchestras and stuff like that. So what they would do is a lot of these drummers actually they were percussionists really because they would have to learn as many instruments as possible because
That's
they
true.
didn't have the budget for like big acts. So a lot of the and again in vaudeville you see that right in vaudeville people had to be entertainers, they had to be drummers, they had to be singers, they had to be different types of musicians, they had to learn all these things, right? And these percussionists were the same way. They had to learn all these different types of instruments, learn how to play them, because that was how you did it back then.
Yeah, yeah, and it's fascinating also to think that there must have been someone who just got it. I mean,
Yeah,
someone who was like totally on board, who totally duplicated it and was really good, and had to train other people, and
right.
that must have happened, at that time. And I'm sure there's historical records that's somewhere that you might be able to deep dive on stuff like this. But the thing about drums is that there's always been documentaries about particular drummers,
hmm
but I don't know, and maybe maybe I there is one, and I'm just completely out of the loop on it. but a documentary that just covers the history going way back, kind of like what we're doing today, but just one documentary. Because even with the guitar, the drums, the instruments,
Okay, so John, you froze. I don't know what happened, but John froze. All right, so I'm going to continue, and when John comes back, he'll come back. But and yeah, I there would be. I don't know if there is a document. I mean, if there would be a documentary, I would think it would be like a 10-part series because there's just so much information. But it would be nice to see a documentary literally from. I'm sure there's some type of stuff like that, but I've never seen a huge documentary on that. But so when we look at, but kind of moving forward now, let's see, John still, John just froze and disappeared. Joe, those of you listening, by the way, so I'm sure he'll be back any second. Must be, I don't know if it's an internet issue or whatever's going on, but he just literally froze and then just disappeared. So it's got to be something going on here. So anyway, I will continue, and we'll, once John gets back, we'll kind of have him dive in on this. So when we look at the early 1900s, as far as drums go, again, like I said, percussionists had to start playing all different instruments. They had to start really diving into that. But, and this is where you really learned how to be percussionists, right? Where you learned how to play bongos and vibraphones and all this type of stuff. Then, but we don't see the evolution of the actual drum set, okay, what that we know today. We don't see it yet at that point. However, that starts to change in the 1900s because there was a gentleman named William Ludwig, and for those of you who are drummers who know, he is huge in the drum world as far as drummers. He was one of the first big drum manufacturers of the time, and he started to actually come out with different types of different types of parts of the drum set. So he was one of the things that he was famous for was the drum pedal. And so he was the first one to manufacture the actual drum pedal. And this immediately became a hit because now it allowed percussionists to be able to use both hands and allowing them to play more instruments in a set that would soon be recognized as literally the first drum set. So he came up with literally what we now know as the drum pedal for the bass drum, right? So if you remember, the bass drum, was pretty much strapped around the person, and then they would kind of hit it with the two things and stuff like that. So now we're putting the bass drum on the floor, we're putting the pedal on it, and now we're starting to create what's evolving into the drum set. And then they start to manufacture hi-hats, and at the time they were small, they were little hi-hats. They were actually like, tiny ones that had a pedal attached to them. So now we have two pedals. We have the pedal, the bass drum pedal, and we have the hi-hat pedal. And then, so little by little, we're starting to see the modern drum set start to appear. And so again, percussionists now were starting to really, being able to do many more things, coming up with different patterns and different things like that. We're still waiting for John, by the way, just so you know. Then, let's see. Let me see if I got anything from... No, John hasn't sent me anything yet, so I don't know what's going on, but I will continue. So then we're seeing that now. In the early 1900s, now we're getting into the 1920s and 30s, we start to see there he is. John is back. John, can you say something, please, so we can hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, now I can hear you.
The power went out.
Oh.
The whole place here, because we've been having some storms.
Oh, okay.
And it just literally just went boom, everything. I'm sitting in the dark. I was just talking about drums, God. And turn on some lights here.
All right,
okay.
so John is back. So I was just I was continuing with it, John. I'll kind of move back a little bit for those.
No, just keep going. I remember I was saying something, and I don't remember what it was, but
Yeah, so just to kind of sum up what I was talking about. So we were talking about the early 1900s, and we were talking about how percussionists were playing a whole bunch of different things, and they had to be able to play all different types of percussion instruments and stuff like that. So, but we still have not seen at that time the evolution of what we know now as the drum set,
Right.
right? So until a gentleman named William Ludwig.
Ah, that sounds
So
familiar.
yes, and like I said, many folks out there know Ludwig, who was one of the biggest drum. He was one of the first and one of the biggest drum makers of the time. And Mr. William Ludwig started to invent different pieces to kind of add on to what percussionists were using. And the first big piece that he made was known as the drum pedal.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I thought for some reason I thought it would be like the bass drum or something.
Well, no. So now, because we have to remember that the bass drum was now being played like basically here a lot, right? You see it in the
Oh, that's right.
percussion,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
They were playing it on the top. So now we can take that bass drum, we can put it on the floor, and we can attach a pedal to it.
That's crazy.
Okay.
But yeah,
And
so he needed to figure out.
yeah.
But this guy was a
So
genius.
yeah,
See, that's
absolute
what I was
genius.
talking about before. Like I was saying about the documentaries. There
Yes.
hasn't really been a documentary to just cover these kinds of things. Because that was what I was saying before. It was even just the guitar. There's a lot of stuff on the guitar.
Right.
A lot of stuff on the guitar, but there's no real, the beginnings and stuff like that. I know that for one of the first instruments, stringed instruments, was about 4,000 years old. It was found in like the pyramids and stuff like that.
Right.
But yeah, that's amazing. So you had to figure out, all right, put the bass drum because you
Yeah.
can't play if you have it on your chest. You can't play. You got to figure out where to put it. I wonder
Exactly.
what people must have thought he was crazy. Well, how do you hit it with your foot?
Yeah.
But you're
But
you're playing with your hands. You got to use your feet too.
yeah, and here's the thing about it though, because immediately or as we say today, it went viral, right? Because now the percussionists were able to use both their hands.
That's right.
And so that allowed them to play more,
Now they can do more
instruments,
things while
more
they're
do more things at one
yeah.
time, start to learn a little bit of the independence, right? And this is where we start to slowly see the evolution of the drum set. So that
Yeah.
starts. It's
It's
incredible.
amazing, and it must have been also interesting to see how where when the hi hat came in, because now that you have more independence, but you only had the floor tom, I mean the bass drum, and then you had the snare,
Yep.
right? Now cymbals.
Well, here's the thing.
But I'll let you go in your because
Yeah,
I'm
well, that right after the pedal, right? They want, people went crazy, especially percussionists went crazy because they wanted to start adding more pieces. They were like, okay, what other type of pieces? This is where the hi-hat starts to come in, right? And the one of the first hi-hats that were made, they didn't look like hi-hats of today. They were, and I should have thought about it. I should have put this video on it because there's a picture of me playing a hi-hat from like the 1920s or 1930s and when I went to the drum museum. But there was a hi-hat, they
right.
call it today, that's called a lowboy. But basically it's a hi-hat that's literally like this small, and it's a pedal with the little hi-hats on it that's very small, and you can't hit it with your sticks because it's so low. But it's literally a pedal that it's like one of the first hi-hats, and they don't make them anymore really, but it's incredible. And again, it's at the Drum Museum in New York. It's an incredible thing. But that was one of the first hi-hats that was actually made.
That's crazy.
So and of course, so now we have now we have both feet being used because now you have the pedal for the hi-hat and you have the pedal for the bass drum. So now we have four limbs going.
That's nuts.
And little by little, now we start to see more of the evolution of the drum set kind of peek its head into. And then this is where it starts to really get interesting because now, of course, in the 1930s, right, 20s, 30s, and stuff like that, we start to see where jazz becomes the music of the time, right? Boom, it starts to explode. This is the big thing. Well, with that, the drum set starts to evolve now, and one of the first people who literally compiled what we know the drum set today. And he's probably, I would say, he's the guy that's the father of the modern drum set, because
Mm.
he literally put together the bass drum, the snare, the toms, the hi hat, and the cymbals. And that's a gentleman named Gene Krupa.
Wow. So he was. See, I mean, obviously, if you're a drummer, you know who Gene Krupa was, but I always didn't know that he was so innovative.
Yes, he was because again, back in those times, they were drummers that were playing, but they didn't actually have the entirety of the set. He was the one that actually put the whole thing together that made this huge piece.
Yeah, and I also think that they weren't really viewed as like such a big part of the thing that's happening. They
Right.
were kind of on the side sometimes. They weren't like
Yes.
center in the back, like they are now. They were sort of on the side, behind stuff. Sometimes
Yes.
you didn't really see them. I mean, you still can't. It's still hard to see drummers sometimes, but they weren't really making them so important into the thing. I think Gene Krupa and people like him
Yes, and he
and
he changed that. He changed that because you're right. Drummers were in the back. Gene Krupa now came out. I mean, he was an extremely talented guy, but he played for a lot of those old jazz guys back then. But then he said, "Okay, I'm making my own group now."
yeah,
And because he was so good, he was probably the first virtuoso of the
right.
time. And we have a little clip of him for those of you who don't know Gene Krupa. John, you want to click on that first? This is from 1947, and this is Gene Krupa playing with his group.
Wow. That's just so epic. You know what I first of all, it's just so much joy that he's having.
Yes.
That it just exudes it and you just feel it. You feel the joy. He's having fun. He's doing things that he knows that it's just a joy to do. And also I was just sound wise, obviously it's a 1947 clip,
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
audio is what the audio was at the time. But also like the snare, it seems so not as cracky,
Right.
which I
Correct.
like it. I
Correct.
like it.
Correct.
It sounds like it has like, I don't know how they had it or what the science was behind the snares, but it just sounded really cool. I love it.
Well, jazz drums in general, when you're looking at big band, specifically, they're designed to be very like tight. Like, yeah, Gene Krupa is good, and Angel Hess says Gene Krupa was amazing.
Yeah,
Okay,
really, really good.
now, but the jazz drums were smaller, and they were designed to be almost like they have no reverb, no echo, no nothing. They were just thud, thud,
Right, right.
right?
Oh,
And even
okay.
and even the bass drums, when you look at the bass drums of the times, they were the same way. Thud, thud, ba-doom, ka-tick, da-boom, ba-da. It was not designed to be big and loud. That's just
Echoey, yeah.
exactly. So, and that's the way those drum. And to this day, if you look at big band players, and there's not many out there at all,
Yeah.
but that's the way those drums are. But the one thing I love about him was he was a showman.
That's what I'm saying.
He
Yeah.
was the showman. I mean,
Love.
he made it an art form, and like you said, he was
Yeah.
having so much fun. It was a joy watching him.
It really is. And I think that's part of the reason, there's so many other drummers that today, for instance, that are just incredible drummers, but there's that joy, it's sort of like they're playing for the technique,
Right,
and
right,
he's
right.
playing for the love of it. Because
Absolutely.
people could say like, oh well, he didn't have, I don't know, whatever drummers would find fault in whatever he was doing, but that's not what he's doing.
No,
It's a
no.
performance. It's a
Yes.
joyous moment that he's doing this. It has nothing to do with like proper technique and having all this. It's like like hearing. There's another guy named Buddy something. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, we'll talk about him in a second, but you're right. And to them, to guys like him and Buddy and those guys in that era, we can go back to, and there's so many of them, Max Roach and all these guys. The drums were no different than the other instruments.
Right.
They were musical. And if you
Correct.
see just by his playing, he was
Very
making,
musical.
even in the solo, he's making music,
100%.
and you don't see that a lot. There's a few guys doing that today, but that's a lost art in drums, in my opinion.
It is. It is. And I think the reason for, and this is just my own estimation right now that I thought of, but it's because the era, the music, that swing music really opened itself to that. Whereas somewhere along the line, that jazz, that swing jazz style became a very 4/4 style.
Right, correct,
And
correct.
then it just became a just keeping the time for the thing. And
Absolutely.
when you're flowing in that area, you can do that. You can have that kind of fun because it really just opens itself up to that style of playing. And unfortunately, pop music didn't really embrace it as much. I'm talking about moving forward. I mean, that
Yeah,
was popular music back then, right? I
that's
mean,
true,
that's what,
true.
Sinatra and all that. But unfortunately, it didn't translate to whatever. I guess when you can go to Elvis, Presley, and the Beatles, it became more. Although, if you look at Ringo, he had that jumpiness
Yes.
to his style where it
Yep.
kind of did have that joyous kind of feeling, where
Absolutely.
so yeah, that's so cool, man.
Yeah, it's amazing. So now we have the evolution of the drum set. We have Gene Krupa, who's really doing that. So there was this other guy who was born in Brooklyn,
You mentioned him to
and
me. I never heard of him.
yeah, and he's coming up at that time, and somehow the gods of drums have blessed this man with an ability that was beyond anything. So
This
his name was Buddy Rich, and this just so you know, those of you who may know about Buddy Rich, he played again. He was a drummer in the back end at one point. He played for Artie Shaw. He played for the Dorsey Band. He played for a lot of. He played when Sinatra was coming up. He played for Sinatra and many of his groups. Okay, but there was a reason why Buddy. And here's the difference also with Buddy Rich. Buddy Rich was a guy straight out of vaudeville. Buddy Rich was a guy, he was a songwriter, he was a singer, he was a dancer, he tap danced, he played the
comedian, he was
drums, he
super
was a
funny.
comedian. Yes, he had everything. And
Yeah,
this is the first, I think, the first guy that literally had everything in one, in
yeah,
my opinion.
yeah.
And
And that was a drummer, like
yes,
solely a drummer, like
exactly.
known as a drummer. But when you go to see Buddy Rich, and this is like, Buddy Rich is, is one of the only artists that I literally like. There are guys like Stevie Ray Vaughan and Santana and stuff like that, Clapton. I'll go back and Joe Bonamassa. I'll go back. I'll go watch some old stuff from them and just see where they were at that point. But Buddy Rich is the only guy really that I would be driving and I would start thinking about his drumming, and I'd get home and just start playing Buddy Rich clips. And literally just, and sometimes I'll send them to you. You send
Yeah,
me stuff,
yeah, yeah.
and it's just stuff that we've seen already. But it's like, what is happening? Like, because here's the thing: today, I'll look at some YouTube videos of or some Instagram drummers, and they're amazing. Like, I'm blown away by some of these drummers.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, but I mean, let me see. I mean, maybe Buddy, and I'll turn on a Buddy Rich thing again, and it's like, oh, there's no, there's what was I thinking?
Yeah.
Even trying to compare. There's no comparison. Also, the fact that he came up at that during that era with that music, again, that music does open itself up to what he was all about. The guy
Yes.
never rehearsed; he just played.
Yes. Yes.
He hated
Yeah.
rehearsal.
Yeah. No, it's true. He hated rehearsal. Now it's interesting because there was a rumor that that he was so good that he didn't practice. Right. That was a big
No,
rumor.
yeah,
So so I was like, okay. So I studied with a gentleman named Joe Morello, who was a guy back in those days as well. As a matter of fact, some of you who know the song "Take Five," he was the drummer who played the solo on that great track. It's one of the greatest tracks out there.
great song. Yeah,
And but anyway, and he was a guy who was very close to Buddy. So I got to be in the room with him. He showed me some techniques, it was great. And I asked him, I said, "Did Buddy practice?" And he said exactly what you said. He said, "Buddy hated rehearsal." He goes, "But don't let anybody fool you. He practiced like a maniac."
yeah.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
He'd be in the back. Now he wouldn't, he'd be alone, he'd be alone, and sometimes you would catch him. He said, but he practiced like crazy. They would hit for hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, so you're taking this God given gift, and then you're taking that, and then you're practicing for hours on top of that.
Yeah.
You're going to forget about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and obviously, there's personalities. He was also a rough character. He was tough on his band.
Yes, he
I mean,
was. Yes, he was.
There's footage of him like yelling, cursing out a band after a gig or something, whatever it was. So if you got to play with Buddy, you were either one of the greatest or you were not.
Correct.
You were
Correct.
not. There was not like he was not going to keep you on if he liked you.
And he was very upfront.
No,
And
he was
he
upfront.
would tell you, and there's that old thing with him and Sinatra where they shared a hotel room at one point, and they got into an argument,
Yeah.
and Sinatra threw I forgot what he threw at him. And he ducked, and they were going to come to blows or whatever, and you could see that because both of those guys had that personality.
Yeah. They were men.
Yes,
They were
yes.
men. They had a lot of testosterone. They had a lot of women, a lot of booze, a lot of success, a lot of money. They lived their lives on the fast track, as you say. And you know what? I know people say, it's like, oh, that they that's what they did.
Right.
And we're still talking about them. And we're going to continue to talk about Sinatra, who's, in my opinion, the greatest singer
Yes.
to ever live, and Buddy Rich, the greatest drummer to ever live. I mean, in my opinion, there's no touching those things.
Be a fly on the wall, man.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that I'll go back just real quickly, because I know we've never done a Sinatra thing, because I know you and I are big
Yeah.
Sinatra fans. But one of the things about Sinatra, you get a young singer, and I've done this. You get a young singer and you give them a song. Give them a song and tell them to practice the phrasing. Don't tell them to just do the song, though. Practice his phrasing. Try to copy his phrasing.
Right.
They'll come back and they'll be like, yo, that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is so hard. Like, his phrasing was just off the charts. His own thing. People can't. I mean, I mean, you have to be a singer to really understand it. I mean, like, I'll look at like somebody like Adele. Has that ability. Who's also was really great was Luther Vandross. Had this incredible phrasing in his voice that he took it to wherever he wanted to go. And Sinatra did that. So these guys, we're talking Sinatra, we're talking Buddy Rich, they were at the top of the game, but not at the top of the game for their era. They were at the top of their game for the rest of humanity, for the rest of time.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think they both knew that.
Yes.
They both knew that. And that there's a certain sense of, and it's very hard for a man, just mortals, to really have full control when everyone is telling you you're the greatest.
Yeah, that's right.
And even though Sinatra has always been, people have talked about him, said he was a great, gracious guy. He really supported a lot of the African American artists, and he really pushed for them to play in places that they or sit in places where he only could sit and they didn't want them to sit. So he was a stand-up guy, but they were both ahead of it.
Yeah.
They were, and people still to this day you can't go back and be like, and even if you like, and again, this is what I say, I'll see an amazing drummer. or I'll hear an amazing singer, and then a Sinatra song comes up on my playlist. It's like, no way. It's like it's over.
Yeah.
It's like how did he do that thing with the voice and catch it again right there and with the band, and then make you feel every time you hear these songs a million times over, you feel the same thing. When I see Buddy Rich, I see these clips of him. It's almost like I'm watching it for the first time again. There's just something, and it's, I always believe that it's a spiritual
Yeah.
universe. It's a spiritual thing. It's a connection, a communication, because that's what art is. Art is communication, and when you have full communication with your art, it resonates, and it resonates to a place that you cannot stop it. Elvis Presley's, the Michael Jacksons, the Princes, all those artists that you cannot deny that it's still flowing. It's still energy that's out there with these guys. So
Yeah, absolutely.
ah,
So yeah, so
right.
just so folks have an understanding of, well, none of us will have the understanding. Even us drummers will not have the understanding. But at least you can appreciate what Buddy Rich did. Let's play this clip of Buddy, and this is an older Buddy, by the way.
This is an older, but that's the one that I don't know if this is the one that you put up there, but no, I don't think it is. But
No, it's not the one that you were talking about, but it's one of
yeah,
those. But
it's
it's
one of those. Yeah, I'm gonna play it
mind-boggling.
now. It's a little bit. It's a little
It's
bit
a
long,
long one, but yeah, trust
but it's
me.
totally worth it.
Yeah.
Check it out, guys. Here we have the amazing Buddy Rich. I've seen that so many times. But even at the start, at the beginning of it, like 10 seconds in, you're like, what?
What's going on? What's happening?
What?
Yeah.
How is
You
he?
know what I love, what's amazing as a drummer, the drummer side of things. When you look at the evenness of his strokes,
Yeah.
like as a drummer, one of the things that, especially when you're doing double stroke rolls, single stroke rolls, you want them to be the spaced very evenly, right?
Right.
To give you that, like, that little that type of
Yeah.
feel. The evenness of his strokes is off the charts.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't,
it's just, even when he goes down to, like, and then bringing it back up, the control that he has
yeah.
is just ridiculous.
And the thing about it also is that, it's not, you're a drummer, so you saying that is more impressive, right, than somebody, an average
Right.
person. But then you have other drummers that are some of the greatest of all time saying the same thing. Like there's no,
Yes.
so that's that kind of thing. Going back to Sinatra and Buddy Rich, they were them. It's not a level you can achieve. This is a maybe people will roll their eyes at this. I don't really give a crap, but there's not a you don't that's what it is.
Yeah.
And then there's people that are down here, and they're greats down here. We've
Hmm.
interviewed some of the greatest of all time,
That's right.
but even they will tell you, no, no, no. We're not there. We
Yeah.
can't get to that point. We're great down here, and we're fantastic, and we're legends down here. But that is something differently. Something different, and just an amazing, amazing.
Yeah. So Buddy Rich was incredible. He passed in 1987, and it was young. He was 69, by the way.
Not only that, but 1986 is the video that
Yeah.
till this day. But we haven't shown. If you're still curious, this was 1 year before he passed. This was 1986, and there is footage. I mean, he's got like a kind of a pinkish sweater
Yeah.
on. He always
Yeah.
wore kind of sweaters and stuff, and he had this like pinkish sweater on, and it was unbelievable because it was so well performed. That's the thing. It's like he does a performance.
Yeah.
It's not just fancy stuff. It's a performance. It's a whole thing. It's the highs and lows. There's what do you call it? Inflections within there. There's dynamics in there where they just come in. It's all of it is within this one structure. And he was doing this a year before he passed. I mean, that's how unbelievable he was, and he would have played till 90 if he would have made it. But he was a
Absolutely.
party guy.
Yeah. Exactly. He
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 liked
lived
to
that.
drink.
He lived that lifestyle.
He
Yep.
lived a fast lifestyle, and he made it to what was it, 69? You said,
69. Yeah.
yeah. So 69. I mean, that's a young man in today's
Yeah.
standards when you're looking at the Stones going out on tour this
Yeah.
summer in their 80s. Yeah, it's crazy.
So now we move from that, and this is where drums start to change now, because out of jazz we start getting into the 50s, where rock and roll enters. Now drums go from being the front to kind of going back to keeping time, because now we have the Chuck Berrys of the world, the Fats Dominoes of the world, and all these people start to really take shape.
Yeah.
Elvis is getting in there, and all these folks. So drummers, and this is what you were talking about earlier, where drummers now really start to play 2/4 time and stuff like that, and they
Right.
become the supportive instrument. And this is where we have, I'll just name, like the Bernard Purdys of the world, who we've spoken about, who did a lot of the Motown stuff, right? Another gentleman named Hal Blaine, who was at the time, who for many years was the most recorded drummer until John
Of course, he
Robinson took.
played everything on the Beatles albums.
Yeah,
So
yeah, of course,
we'll
exactly.
check those out.
And then we have this, you're right. We have, then of course we get into the 60s, where we have the British invasions, we have the Stones, we have the Beatles, of course we have Ringo now, who comes on the scene now and becomes the most influential person to all the young cats out there now, right?
Yeah.
Because now think about all the drummers who picked up sticks just because of him.
Oh man, I mean, every single person we interviewed
Yes.
that was a drummer, or not even a drummer, musicians in general, because of Ringo and those four guys. But yeah, I mean, I think the influence that Ringo had because I feel like he, well, you can't really talk about the Beatles because that was like a whole other, you know what I mean? That was like a whole other, perfect storm,
Right.
lightning in a bottle kind of thing, once in a lifetime. That's not something, but he fit in. He wasn't a jazz drummer, although
Right.
he could play some jazz,
Hmm.
but he wasn't a jazz drummer. But he did incorporate some things in some of those songs that were very, very creatively, very unique in its presentation.
Yeah.
And I think that really resonated with people wanting to become drummers because
Right.
they weren't hearing the, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's some great drummers, obviously, Chuck Berry, you mentioned, I
Hmm.
mean, of course, that's great music.
Yeah.
It's great, but again, it's a 2/4 beat. It stays that way. There may be a couple of accents
Hmm.
here and there. I think a little bit of Jerry Lee Lewis with
Yes.
the Great Balls of Fire,
That's
where there
right.
was a lot of like, you take them on and you run in my brain. Dun, 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 you got the brain like a man insane. Dun, 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 that kind of thing. So there is a little bit of dynamics
Right.
within the rock and roll thing, and it took over the world.
Yep.
But here's the thing that I love, and I think you're going to talk about this maybe, where the 40s meet the 50s, meet the 60s, meet the 70s, where the guys that were growing up in the 40s that were influenced by Krupa and Rich were also in the rock and roll scene, and they brought
Exactly.
that jazz influence into rock. So I was saying earlier today that a lot of it they didn't bring it into pop music. I was kind of wrong about that. I kind of, what I meant was, overall it's not really thought of,
Right.
but there were these drummers that came in and brought that 40s, 50s, that whole swing era style dynamics
Yep.
into modern music. And for those artists that were smart enough to recognize it, like Paul Simon, uh, you know, later on Sting,
Hmm.
those kinds of guys, they still understand there's a power behind having a great drummer.
Yes. And you see
Just
the,
yeah,
you see that in, especially in the blues, because the blues, you have, and you know this better than anybody, that shuffle feel, right?
right.
You see that with a lot of the old, uh, you know, the old John Lee Hooker stuff, and the old, what's his name, Lucille. Why is he
Muddy Waters,
Muddy
BB
Waters, and these
BB
guys,
King.
and yeah, BB King. Those shuffles came out of swing.
That's it.
Okay, and
Hmm.
your ability to be able to play those shuffles, that's
Yeah,
where it's all, and
they
it
had to
took.
adapt
Yes, correct.
to the blues.
And
They
it
had to,
took
yeah,
it took, and what Kenny Aronoff said it on our show. He said you have to live in that world to
right.
be able to play those things. Like Chris Layton and those guys, in those days where that's all they did all day long was play
That's
those
it.
shuffles.
That's it.
You
And
know.
then not only that, I'm here in Nashville, and I go out a lot and watch bands and stuff, and it's still here. It
Hmm.
it has not gone anywhere. You know what I mean? It's still here. That shuffle is still here. The All those techniques, and I played a week ago. I had a jam with a bunch of guys, and that drummer. What did he talk? We didn't talk about the new drummer for the new band, whatever. We talked about Steve Gadd. We talked
Hmm.
about Steve Smith. We talked about Ringo. Always Ringo comes up.
Yeah.
That's what, in between jams, we talked about those kinds of drummers and stuff, and that's what he was still to this day. And this was a young guy. I think this guy was probably maybe, like, I don't know, maybe in his 30s, or mid 30s or something. But yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, it's incredible. So now we're seeing that, and then those guys, like you said, John, those guys, the Bonhams of the world, and Steve Gadd and these guys. And I have a clip of Steve Gadd. So now we're getting, who are influenced by all those guys in the '40s. Now we're getting into the '60s and '70s. Right now we're getting the heavy stuff. So we're getting the Zeppelin
Right.
and Rush and all these guys. And
Remember, these guys were young. The
yes,
Steve Gadd, for instance, were young. They were influenced by those drummers,
exactly,
the
exactly.
Koopas and the Riches.
And Steve Gadd, so if we take a look at a guy like Steve Gadd, for those of you who don't know, he's a guy, I think he's one of in my opinion, he's one of the very few guys that's still alive to this day that is kind of an extension of those guys.
Yeah.
He's a very
Right.
old school way of playing. So Steve Gadd is a guy he played it. He was huge in the '70s with the Chick Corea stuff. Played jazz amazing, Chick Corea's electric bands and those things. He played on a lot of the Paul Simon stuff. He's considered probably one of the most influential drummers on the planet in the past 50 years.
Agreed.
And but he's the one guy I think that
Yeah.
melds the two things. He melds the amazing technique with groove, and
Mm.
he can sit and he can just groove it out the whole time,
Yeah.
or he can just give you an amazing lesson in incredible technique. Now he was a guy who came out of the drum corps. He was in the army, and one of his great solos is called Crazy Army, and he does it all the time in his clinics and stuff like that. But he was a very drum corps type of guy, and we have a clip of him. So just so you know, many of you I mean, most people have heard him, but if you know Paul Simon had a great single called 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, which starts with one of the most amazing drum patterns you're ever going to hear. And we have a
To
clip of
this
Steve.
day,
Yeah,
the thing about drum patterns, they're like guitar solos. Like we all know Stairway to Heaven's guitar solo. We all know the Eagles Hotel California guitar solo. You can all sing it with your mouth, right? Even if you don't play an instrument, you know that guitar solo, right?
right.
And so Steve Gadd created a drum rhythm that you just know. You just
Absolutely.
know it, and it is classic, and it fit perfectly. And kudos to Paul Simon for allowing this creativity. And I think great artists see great artists,
Yeah,
and they let the great artists be. And I heard Sting once in an interview say, "I'm going to surround myself by the greatest musicians and let them do what they do. I'm going to bring a song and then see what they can actually bring to it, because it's going to make me look better. It's going to make the whole project look better." The Ten Summoner's Tale
yes,
album for me is one of my favorite
yes.
Sting albums, and that's
Colluda, yep,
Vinny
yep.
Colaiuta on that, and just the feel in that as well. It's sort of an extension of Gad and all these guys being able
Absolutely.
to be allowed,
Yes.
allowed to do that.
And a lot
So
of people ask him that question, which came first, the song or the actual piece? And he said the song came first, but like you said, he was allowed, he wanted to come up with something, and it was only because of something he was literally working on patterns just for his practice.
yep.
And he was doing that, and then all of a sudden he started to do this little pattern, and everybody loved it, and they put it in the song, and that became the base of the song. And in this clip that we're going to play, he actually demonstrates and explains how he does it.
All right, let's check it out.
I'll play the hi-hat part by itself. Okay? Mm-hmm.
I love that. What I love is like
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's
And that's
just a
how
group.
he always does that. Always
Yeah, he
play
just
that.
has this, like, he's so in
He's
it.
into it. He puts his whole body
He's
into
so
it.
in it, yeah. And the thing is, you could hear the song in your head.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like it's so ingrained, that rhythm with that song. It's just so amazing. He's just one of and we've talked about him a lot also
Yeah,
as being
he's. I
the
got a chance
best
to see
groove.
him. I got a chance to see. He's still playing. I think he's 80 years old.
Yeah, he
He's
still
still
plays.
out there playing. I got a chance to see him live with Michelle Camillo and Anthony Jackson in a club. Got to meet him. Got to take a picture with him. So it was it was one of my great honors in my life to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And just yeah,
He asked about you once.
yes, he did ask about me. By the way, he did. Yeah, don't forget that one.
I know. we
Uh,
we I had to hear that.
I was like, he asked
Yeah.
about me.
He's like, yeah, but that's true. But Steve Gadd asked about me, right? No matter what happens in life, you could
Listen,
always say that.
that's right. Absolutely. That means that there was
That moment,
there was a
yeah.
thought about me. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think about that when I was at the Santana concert. I was like in the front row, and I was like, I went like this, and he looks down, he looks at me, he goes to me. But that
Nice.
split second, me and Carlos Santana had a moment together. So it was like it's so silly, but yet so powerful.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love it.
So,
Yeah,
so
Steve Gadd.
Steve, yeah, so guys like Steve Gadd again was one of the guys to me that defined, groove, because
Yeah.
his number one thing was groove. He always started every song with the simplest point, and then if he wanted to branch out, he branched out there. Where a lot of drummers will start complicated and bring it down to simple, he was always simple. And to this day, at 80 years old, he still talks about being simple and playing for the music.
Waiting for the music.
And that's what makes him just the drummer's drummer. They call him. He's,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
extremely influential.
Just
So
fantastic.
so then we have Steve Gadd, and then we have incredible players, gentlemen that we had on this show,
Right.
Mr. Steve Smith,
Yeah.
who was who's considered one of the greats of all time as well. This is a gentleman who many of you know him as the drummer. He was the drummer for Journey, played a lot of those classic Journey songs.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Journey. Don't Stop Believing and all that, which again was a pattern that he came up with, and
Yeah.
great pattern. And I had so he came on this show. He talked about his philosophy, even though in his he's a jazz drummer, and he goes out with his great band Vital Information.
Yeah. 40 years.
For 40 years, be a three-piece band, just doing amazing things. But he can switch it
Like
on and play
Bollywood.
rock, But he's just an incredible. But he's also a great guy,
Yeah,
you know,
he's
just-
super nice guy.
and he's again another old school type of guy who plays an incredible, jazz, and just one of the most incredible plays. But I brought a clip, and the reason why I chose this clip is because he's playing a set from the 1930s. It's a 1930 Slingerland set, and Slingerland with Ludwig was one of the big, one of the big manufacturers of the day. And I just wanted to have a clip of him playing that set. I thought it was very special. So if you
Here
want
he
to
is.
put it is.
So epic.
You know what's so great about that is that that's exactly how those drums would have been played at that time.
Yeah,
You
and that's
know?
how they, I mean, that was it. That was an original. We also had the Northup on our show as well,
Yes.
and he runs the drum
The
museum,
Northup, yep, the Northup Drum
Northup
Museum
Drum
in
Museum.
upstate New York.
Yeah, and just an incredible knowledge, a guy who just has so many unique things. I mean, we could have had him on the show for a month straight, and it would have
Yeah.
been different stuff because he had so much collection there. But you didn't tell the story. You actually got to go there and
Yeah,
meet
yeah. So
Steve and play.
I got to visit the Northup Drum Museum up in upstate New York, and it just so happened that Steve Smith, because Steve Smith was on our show, and he came and he sat with me,
'Cause you don't live
and
that far from him.
actually, yeah, correct. It was not too far from him upstate, and we got to jam at the Northup Drum Museum. And if anybody's interested, definitely check out that. If anybody's up in New York and want to see, it's just one of the most amazing museums of drums, but also drum history. If you
Yeah.
want to know anything about history, and he'll take you through the whole thing. He'll show you the older sets, Buddy Rich's sets in there.
Yep.
I mean, he's got classic sets in there. It's just an incredible thing. And Steve and I had a chance to jam that day, and it was one of the most incredible things in my life. It was great.
Yeah, I remember when you messaged me. He was like,
Yeah, even my wife was there, and she was like, "That was incredible."
Yeah.
And she's not a musician, and she was blown away by the stuff that she saw.
Yeah, oh man, that's so freaking cool. Yeah, Steve is definitely a great guy, and we'll definitely love to have him back on the show at some point for sure. I know he's out with Vital Information,
Yeah.
doing that and getting ready for this year, some shows, and he may be coming to Nashville. Maybe coming to Nashville. Yeah,
Nice, nice.
I'm working on some stuff.
But he's
Um,
one of the greats out there. So and I want one. I mean, again, there's a million drummers. We don't have time to go through any of them because, like I said, this we would
it's
have to
great.
do so
Yeah, I
many of
mean,
them. But I
we're,
just want
we
I
had Kenny
wanted to.
Aronoff. We have to give him a
Yes,
shout out.
correct. Kenny
Was on our
Aronoff,
show.
and he's
Great
one of the
guy
great.
also.
Yes, one of the greats, Kenny Aronoff, who's incredible, a drummer still out there pounding it out, playing with.
Played with the two remaining Beatles,
That's right.
John Mellencamp, all those records that we know. He's actually played on 300 million records sold. Is like his stat on how many he's played on. What? And that's higher now, probably. That was back a year ago or 2 years ago when he was on our show.
Absolutely. So
Crazy.
that we get, so then we go, 70s, 80s, and 90s where drums again were, you see the click track come in, and drummers were starting to their metronomic times, because now music was being recorded differently, right? David Foster and all these guys now were doing these songs, and they wanted the time to be specific. So Jeff Porcaro, honorable mention with Toto, but did amazing. If you
Incredible
want to
job.
hear some incredible stuff, him and Boz Scaggs did some amazing things with like Low Down and Lido Shuffle.
Yeah, we got to mention Charlie Watts. We have
Charlie
to
Watts
mention
with
Tom Bonham,
yeah, that's
Rolling
right.
Stones.
Who played jazz also,
Yeah, he's a
had his
jazz
own
drummer.
jazz group
Played jazz. He would actually be preferred to play jazz, but he had this gig
called the Rolling Stones.
with the Rolling Stones that he couldn't resist. Um, John Bonham, of course, from Led Zeppelin.
Neil
These were all
Peart.
drummers. Keith Moon, we got to throw
Yes.
him in there and mention his. And again, this is it's just it's too much to cover. These
Yeah.
guys are documentaries in themselves. Just
Yes,
one.
absolutely. Absolutely. They were all amazing. I was influenced by all of them. And I've taken a little bit of all of those for me in my style and kind of melded them into my own thing. One last gentleman that I threw in there because I think now he holds the mantle of the most recorded drummer of all time.
Yep.
His name is John J.R. Robinson. Everybody has heard him. If you heard anything Michael Jackson has done, if you heard anything
You've
that
all heard.
Whitney
Yeah.
Houston or
You could ask somebody, do you know who John Robinson is, and they'll be like, no, I don't know. But you can almost not 100% know that you've heard his drums, unless you're
Yes.
living like in the Amazon, somewhere like in
Yes.
the jungles. But even then, you'd be like, hee hee.
Yeah, in the late '70s, he came out big because he played with Shaka Khan, and into the 80s, 90s, into the 2000s. He
Guy
was
you would call.
yeah, he's the guy. He was the guy that went into the studio and you want a good time. So, just a clip. He was the gentleman. For everybody knows the song "Rock with You," Michael Jackson. He was the gentleman where you hear that part in the beginning. He came up with, and I played a clip here where he talks about exactly how he came up with that piece.
All right.
Quincy looked at me and he goes, JR, could you come up with a drum fill that the whole world will forever identify with this song? Forever. And I looked at him and I go, oh, like, and there's no pressure. And they turn around and Rod does this smoking thing back at me and comes back and they go back in there and I looked at the guys and I go, well, and so I have 8 clicks or 2 bars of click, and it went,
And that's pretty much what it was.
Play it one more time. I just want to play the beginning part. I mean, you immediately just ready. You really, you know that. Oh, man.
But the funny thing is that I played that pretty much everywhere I've played, right?
Yeah,
and I did it as a warm up just to play around with it. But every single time I played it,
Yeah.
Anybody who was either in the audience listening or anybody who was in the band would turn around and go, "Rock with you,"
Yeah.
just completely know it.
Yeah, everybody knows it. And it kind of a little bit of the Steve Winwood Higher Love.
Yes, the intro to Higher Love. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the intro to Higher Love is kind of has that not as iconic
Right.
as far as recognizable, but to a drummer or to a musician or to somebody who just loves music, that would definitely be one as well. Wow. Well, we've covered a lot here and we can still go on. This has been a tremendous honor for us to actually bring you these amazing artists that we love. And this is what we do. We share things that we love because George and I are passionate about art and we're passionate about drums and music and film and nutrition, health. And because of that, we love to bring these things to you in the hopes that we provide value, entertainment, and give you something to talk about Monday morning around that water cooler, right? But we really, really love the opportunity that we get here to be with you Sunday nights and Monday through Fridays in the mornings. But we appreciate you so much. So I want to thank you for joining us this evening. George, thank you for putting this together. This was awesome. I love all these clips that you put together. Just a perfect balance, starting from like the beginning, taking us all the way down to like the classics and to new people. We actually did not mention one person.
Mr. Neil Peart from Rush. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
But I was thinking to myself, this is a whole show.
That's a whole show in and of itself, yeah.
Yeah, because George and I are also Rush fans. George is a psychotic Rush fan.
Yeah.
I love Rush as well, but George is at another level. And we're gonna do a show on that just to talk about Neil because it's just not fair.
Correct.
To bring him. But all these guys were fantastic. Buddy Rich, wow. All these clips. So thank you so much, George, for putting this together. We appreciate it. And all right, friends, thank you for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you. We definitely don't take it for granted that you spent some time with us here. That's definitely means a lot to us. So we appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's see, somebody said something here. Loved the drum show. Your best show yet, John.
Wow, look at that.
Thank you so much. That was due to George. So thank you, George, for doing that. Appreciate you. All right. Thank you, everybody. See you all next week. We appreciate it again. We love you. And as always, peace.